The warm waters of the Mediterranean Sea ebb and flow across the beach below the Promenade des Anglais in Nice. It is early morning. The salinité, what the French call the fragrance of the salty sea, entices daybreak over the Côte d'Azur coastline. It is the last day of 1925, and movie star Rudolph Valentino and his entourage motor down the promenade. The two grand cars park before their destination, the Hotel Negresco. Valets rush to assist. In the lead car, Rudolph Valentino, his handsome Mexican attaché and acting secretary, Manuel Ricci, and the actress known as the girl with the bee-stung lips, Mae Murray. The second car is crammed with luggage. Valentino reserved rooms in the Hotel Negresco in advance, and his immediate focus on arrival was negotiating the logistics of his New Year's Eve dinner that evening. He'd invited a party of 12, and arriving the day of left him little time to lose. He was informed it was too late to book a table in the Salle des Fêtes, the hotel's main ballroom where 1,200 guests would celebrate. But management promptly assured him his dinner party could be accommodated with a private table set in the hotel's grill room. The story of Rudolph Valentino's 1925 New Year's Eve dinner party at the Hotel Negresco cannot currently be found in any Valentino biography, and the scant information shared, even those biographies referred to as the gold standards, is largely inaccurate. We have just completed research on Valentino's travels during those 2 months in Europe, searching through local archives, French, British, and German, and now have documented changes to the history of what actually took place. Rudolph Valentino spent New Year's Eve 1925 in the grill room in the Hotel Negresco on the French Riviera, in that palatial hotel with the iconic pink dome on the Promenade des Anglais beach, and he spent it with Mae Murray. In fact, during December of 1925, Valentino was almost always in the company of Mae Murray. Before delving into this episode, I establish one critical point regarding Valentino's relationship with the effervescent Ms. Murray that winter. I cite the S. George Ullman memoir, the 1975 memoir, page 68, and I quote, "One time, Rudy, and I went to the boxing matches alone in his car. As we emerged after the events, he saw Mae Murray walking towards the parking lot. He invited her into his car, and there he hugged and kissed her passionately, and then drove off with her, leaving me there without transportation. But I couldn't blame him." End quote. It is true Mae and Rudy were old friends and had known each other since their early days in New York City. They'd appeared in 2 movies together, The Delicious Little Devil and Big Little Person in 1919. But by the end of 1925, the notion they were just friends was something which became increasingly difficult to sell to the curious press and public. I share the following to set the scene. Rudy and Mae were both newly separated at the time from their individual spouses, and Valentino was but a few weeks away from being divorced from Natasha Rambova. Mae's divorce from her first husband, director Robert Leonard, was finalized the previous spring. Time-wise, Rudolph Valentino and Mae Murray's playful, non-committal romp through December of 1925 worked conveniently for both of them. At that point in their lives, neither of them seemed interested in another marriage or exclusivity, and both were a whole lot interested in having fun, engaging in playful sex, and carousing with their high-profile celebrity friends in the world's most luxurious hotels. Rudy and Mae had a history, but I would describe them at that time as being friends with benefits, as the expression goes, more into interjecting lust at that point in their lives than romance. George Ullman gave us the insight into this truth about Rudy and Mae locking lips passionately, and in Michael Anchorich's fine biography, Mae Murray, the Girl with the Bee-Stung Lips, He cites Ullman's anecdote and adds that William and Anna King, Mae's brother and sister-in-law, told their son Robert that Mae was, and I quote, rather promiscuous. During the December bender, as it has been called, Rudolph Valentino and Mae Murray returned with wild abandon to their freshly minted single lifestyles. And as Valentino and Mae Murray were always headlines, the press consequently tried and often failed to keep up with their gallivanting. For this reason, documenting a precise timeline is, and was for us, not an easy task. Newspapers were buzzing with Valentino headlines, which were primarily announcing reviews of his latest movies, The Eagle and Cobra. The often conflicting reports of the comings and goings of Valentino and Mae Murray reveal the reporters' efforts to keep up with the lovebirds and determine the degree of their true involvement. For Rudolph and Mae, it was ocean liners, ferries, trains, and automobiles, as they traversed back and forth between London, Paris, Berlin, and the French Riviera, and appeared publicly here, there, and everywhere to a bemused public. Today, we break it down and document the timeline for those trips in December of 1925 and January of 1926, and we change some Valentino history. Today, Rudy and Mae, their European affair, and their New Year's Eve party at the Negrisco.
Ciao, I am Renato Floris, the very proud publisher of all the entertaining and groundbreaking books on Rudolph Valentino and Natasha Rambova by Evelyn Zumaya Floris. I'm here today with Evelyn to discuss more about our fascinating work. Ciao, Evelyn.
Ciao, Renato. It's great to be here. And I'm pretty excited about this episode, as you know.
Bene, sì, lo so.
With all of the new material you discovered in the British, French, and German archives, we were able to reconstruct Valentino's trip to London, Paris, Berlin, and Nice, and in the process change a few points in his history from this previously rather blurry time in his life. We opened this episode with a glimpse into Rudy and Mae's party on December 31st, 1925, and I will set this event within its historical context by going back in time just a bit to understand just what was going on.
The news about Valentino, as you mentioned, was then mostly about his divorce from Natasha and these movies, The Eagle and Cobra.
It was. But Natasha Rambova was not the only woman gracing the Valentino reportage that fall and winter. We know Natasha traveled to France to file for a divorce, and she returned to New York City in November on Election Day in 1925. She was ready to begin filming in her first starring role in the movie Do Clothes Make the Women, later retitled When Love Grows Cold. Yet news of Natasha's arrival and impending movie did not overshadow the enticing presence of Mae Murray at Rudolph's side. And as we heard from eyewitness George Ullman, Rudy and Mae were taking their friendship into a new dimension. They both left Los Angeles bound for New York with intentions of traveling on to Europe, ostensibly on business. Rudy left Los Angeles on November 4th, boarding the California Limited in Pasadena. According to the Los Angeles Times that day, he gave a lengthy statement before departing. And I quote the Times from November 4th, 1925. "You know," Rudy commented, "I'm just beginning to feel that I may be as well off single as I was married. I love to appreciate beauty. I realize now that is in my nature. This quality may have given Mrs. Valentino some cause for jealousy, and I may have been a poor husband in that respect. She wanted to isolate me as much as possible. That was her nature. But I've been getting around a little now, and I'm just beginning to realize how much fun I was missing being married." End quote. Renato, I think he was making the best out of a lousy situation. But he had 2 movies opening, and press was press. He knew well that the news he was about to be single again had reporters taking note of his every attention paid to women, and Mae took center stage even before her departure to Europe. On November 8th, she accompanied Rudy to the opening of the Eagle at the Strand Theater, New York City. On the 12th, she hosted a bon voyage party in her hotel suite for him in advance of his departure for Europe 2 days later. Valentino planned to travel first to London to attend the opening of the Eagle and then on to Paris to finalize his divorce from Natasha. Renato, as you know, I'm not going to sidetrack into the details of their divorce in this episode. Suffice to say, despite a few glitches, it would go smoothly and was granted by the Tribunal of the Seine in January of 1926. Now, in preparation for Rudy's trip abroad, his close friend and trusted business manager, George Ullman, recruited Mexican diplomat and Valentino's friend Manuel Ricci to accompany him, to act as pressman and secretary. Ullman wrote in his memoir he hoped Ricci would oversee Rudolph, especially where spending was concerned.
Manuel Ricci was the husband of Valentino's co-star in The Chic, Agnes Ayres, wasn't he?
He was. And Agnes was pregnant at the time her husband left with Valentino for Europe in November of 1925, and she would later testify during her divorce from Ricci she believed he would only be gone a few weeks. She charged him with desertion. Ricci had a reputation as a playboy, and Agnes would also address this extensively in her divorce proceedings. Now, George Ullman was completely unaware of these issues then, and believed Ricci was the right man for the job. Ullman established lines of credit for Valentino's trip abroad, and on Saturday, November 14th, Rudolph Valentino and Manuel Ricci left New York aboard the SS Leviathan. They arrived in England on the 20th, a few days before the opening of the Eagle at the Marble Arch Pavilion on the 23rd. They checked into the Hyde Park Hotel. Mae Murray would leave New York headed for London aboard the SS Majestic a few days later. On Rudy's arrival in London, he told reporters he would not only visit Paris and Berlin, but Italy and Cairo. I quote the Westminster Gazette, November 21st, 1925. In his suite at the Hyde Park Hotel, Valentino told a representative of the Westminster Gazette that his reason for wanting to go to Cairo was for the excellent tangoing he had heard he could get there, and, quote, because I'm very anxious, he said, to see what an honest-to-goodness chic looks like, end quote. On Sunday, November 22nd, Valentino's brother Alberto, wife Ada, and young Jean arrived in London from Italy to stay as guests of the famous brother. The announcement of Alberto's arrival in London, as it was published in the Daily Mirror, reports he was there to, quote, learn the movie production business. To the chagrin of his fans, after appearing at the Eagle's opening, Rudy disappeared. He'd left London and was off to Wareham for an equestrian respite, riding with friends. The plaintive cry from his fans outside the Hyde Park Hotel rang out, "We want Rudolph." On Sunday, November 29th, Rudy left London for a trip to Paris, reported as being incognito, to fulfill residency requirements for his divorce from Natasha. As reported in the Chicago Tribune on November 29th, with a headline reading, Valentino on art and celibacy bent slips into Paris, it is reported Rudolph Valentino is also pursuing a career as an artist with his friend Spanish portrait painter Beltrán Masses, and I quote, Rudolph Valentino has slipped into Paris from London under what might be called incognito. The handsome man of the films, bent on becoming a bachelor and a painter, tried to make a very stealthy entry into town. The business of becoming a bachelor being safely in the hands of his attorneys and Winifred's, Rudolph is now free to work on a painting. He's going to be abroad only 2 months, and in that time plans a few jaunts around Europe, but he'll devote all of the rest of his time to the development of his newly discovered talent. His master, Federico Beltrán Masses, met him at the train, and the pair rushed off to the hotel to inspect Rudolph's latest canvas. Beltrán Masses seemed honestly impressed and shook his pupil's hands warmly. It was a portrait of a woman. For use in Paris and in running around Europe, Valentino has purchased 2 handsome cars, one a closed town model and the other a swanky sport creation. Valentino is passing the weekend with friends in the country near Paris. The first of the week, he returns to London, where his latest film, The Eagle, the first made under his own supervision, is having a tremendous success. He returns to Paris again early next week, ready to plunge into a program that will take him to Italy and perhaps to Germany and Spain. He will sail for home in the Leviathan on January 19th. End quote. Rudy returned to London the week of December 7th, and 4 days later, on December 11th, Mae Murray arrived aboard the SS Majestic. She and Rudy went directly to the Savoy Hotel for a reunion. The following day, Rudy and Mae are seen on the ferry for France and are spotted on deck as source to the Dundee Courier, and I quote, "The flood of voyagers to France is in full tide, and crammed trains wait upon crowded boats. Among the travelers from Victoria to Paris the other day were Mr. Rudolph Valentino and Miss Mae Murray, who sat out on deck crossing over, the objects of much interest and not a little photography." End quote. Rudy's arrival in Paris on that December 13th was a legendary fan mobbing scenario, and I quote the Los Angeles Times, December 14th, 1925. The headline reads, "French Women Mob Valentino." Rudolph Valentino's arrival in Paris from London precipitated a riot by 2,000 French admirers, mostly feminine, who waited in the station for hours in the bitter cold and, fearing they would fail to see him, ran amok completely. Rudolph, though the object of goodwill, came to grief, being buffeted on the sea of rioting femininity and crushed against a door jamb. The combined efforts of his managers, pushing, shoving, and kicking shins, resulted in his rescue. He then was a sorry sight, his hat missing, being unslicked, and clothes half pulled off. End quote. Mae and Rudy spent the next few days in Paris, and then were back to London.
Mae Murray went to Europe then allegedly on business.
Yes. She was then contractually obligated to filming movies in Germany, but decided better of that career move, so she went to Berlin to negotiate a release from her contract. She and Rudy left for Berlin together from London on the weekend of December 20th. This is where we found 2 versions of the events as reported. Did Rudy and Mae drive to Berlin from Paris or take the train? According to Manuel Ricci, Rudy bought 2 new cars in Paris, which they drove to Berlin that weekend. And with 2 fabulous new vehicles at his disposal, it's doubtful Rudy would have taken the train. After a few public appearances together along the way, the rumor mill was spinning, and headlines posed the direct question, was Valentino about to marry Mae Murray? He denied this emphatically, and Mae laughed it all off, saying, and I cite the Tampa Bay Times, December 22nd, "Rudy is the sweetest boy I have ever known," said Mae. "We are just the very best of friends," said Rudy, "but romance? No." "I wish there were," said Mae. "Never again," said Rudy when the marriage question was broached to him. Their joint trip to Europe, both averred, was an accident. "We just bumped into each other everywhere," said Mae, but she admitted the trip to Berlin was by prearrangement. End quote.
They were in Berlin together by December the 22nd.
Yes, they were, Renato, and they both checked in to the Hotel Adlon. We're not so convinced Rudy had much to do in Berlin, and we think the trip to Berlin happened only because Mae had business there. But during his stay in Berlin, Rudy made the rounds and visited with German director F.W. Murnau. He also dealt with an unsettling political situation inspired by his presence. Reportedly, protesters gathered outside the Hotel Adlon to file their loud rejection of how the German army and officers were portrayed in Rudolph's movie The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Mae's business in Berlin was more involved. as she terminated contracts and negotiated the settlement. Adding to the logistical involvements in Berlin, Rudy's visa was found to not be valid, which sent diplomat Manuel Ricci on a mission to remedy the situation.
And here we found the first change in Valentino's history.
Oh, we sure did, Renato. It is reported in almost every book on Valentino that he made a quick trip back to London to spend Christmas 1925 with his family, who had been parked there waiting for him for a month since the end of November. This family Christmas could not have happened for the following reasons. Considering the time involved in the transactions in Berlin for both Rudolph and Mae, it would have been logistically impossible for them to return to London within one day of arriving in Berlin. More significantly, it would have been impossible for Rudy to even leave on that Wednesday and arrive in time for Christmas on Friday. We allege because of the reality of travel time, Christmas in London never happened. Mae and Rudy arrived in Berlin together on December 22nd, and Wednesday, the next day, December 23rd, was their first day in Berlin. Christmas fell on that Friday that year, 2 days or 48 hours later. Did Rudy have time to make that quick trip by himself to London from Berlin in time for Christmas? No, he did not. To break that down, from Berlin it was a train ride to Paris, perhaps a bit shorter if he drove the distance. Then one was required to take the boat train from Paris, then the ferry to Dover, and then another train to London. Yet it is reported today on various sites, such as on His Fame Still Lives, that Rudy and Mae spent 48 hours in Berlin before that quick trip back to London for Christmas. Well, I would point out to the administrator of that site that Christmas was 48 hours after their arrival in Berlin. And if they left 48 hours after the arrival, they would not have made it to London until almost 2 days after Christmas. And it is safe to say that logically Rudy stayed more than 1 day in Berlin and spent Christmas 1925 in Berlin with Mae. We found no press coverage about Rudy's arrival back in London for Christmas on Friday that week. The first public Guglielmi family photos were taken on board the Leviathan on January 19th as they prepared to sail to New York. We did, however, find plenty of news stating Rudy went directly from Berlin by car to Nice for New Year's Eve. Soon after Christmas, news broke about Rudy and Mae's plans to travel to Nice for New Year's Eve, and I cite the Menton and Monte Carlo News. And I quote, Rudolph Valentino, the famous chic of the film world, is expected here shortly. Rooms have already been engaged by his secretary. Rudy, as he is known to his friends, will be here to spend a month or 6 weeks in Nice, after which he plans to go to Italy. End quote. Again, 2 different versions of how they traveled to Nice exist. It is first reported Mae and Rudy returned to Paris from Berlin and then drove to Nice. It is also reported that Rudy and Manuel drove from Berlin to Nice, with one report specifying it took them, quote, more than 24 hours. That time frame makes that scenario plausible, as it is a distance of about 750 miles between Berlin and Nice, which today would take 16 hours to drive. With fewer motorways in 1925, the drive could well have taken them 24 hours. They would have driven through Switzerland and the mountainous Piedmont region of northern Italy, crossing the French border at Ponte San Luigi. And I quote the Chicago Tribune, European edition from December 28th, and I quote, Rudolph Valentino and Mae Murray, the 2 cinema idols who have been playing around together in Europe recently, will make the Riviera the scene of their next meeting, it is said here today. According to a report current in the American movie colony here, they will come from Berlin, arriving on Tuesday or Wednesday. Valentino already has informed the Hotel Negrisco that he is coming. The pair will have their New Year's Eve party either in Nice or Monte Carlo. Probably the latter, and it is expected that Rex Ingram and his wife Alice Terry will be among the members of the party. Alice Terry arrived at Nice yesterday after a visit in America. Mr. Ricci, who is the husband of Agnes Ayres, also will be here with the Valentino party, end quote. The fabulous dinner party, hosted by Rudolph Valentino and Mae Murray, incredibly went unaccounted for in their histories. In Emily Leiter's Dark Lover, she has Rudolph playing baccarat in the Monte Carlo casino and welcoming the year quietly. I would say that version is not so accurate at all. The actual story goes like this. As I mentioned in the opener, after Rudy and Mae arrive at the Negrisco, he is told he's arrived too late to book a table in the main ballroom that night. But he is, after all, Rudolph Valentino, and consequently accommodations are made. A table is set and decorated for Valentino's guests in the bar called the Grill Room, a walnut-paneled room with 17th century tapestries on the walls. He and Mae ring in the new year with many notables, and I cite News from Nice about the New Year's Eve celebrities and events. And I quote, "The Hotel Negrisco deserves mention at the head of the list as regards to the numbers of guests entertained. There were over 1,000 diners. Mr. Rudolph Valentino, the famous sheik of the films, arrived the same evening and had to be content with his party of 12 friends at a table in the grill room, for the salle de fête could hold no more. The decorations were white and silver, and the souvenirs were so pretty that there was a small battle to get them, but fortunately, Mr. Sartori had provided a significant number." End quote. And from the Chicago Tribune coverage, I quote, "An international party of brilliant gaiety, marked by the presence of notables from a dozen countries, crowded the Negrisco to overflowing. Among those present were Mr. Harry F. Sinclair, president of the Sinclair Consolidated Oil Company, Mr. Rudolph Valentino, the famous American film star, Mr. Rex Ingram and his wife Alice Terry, Baron von Bleichreuther, Dr. Voronoff, Monsieur Ribecourt, and Monsieur Aubert, the film magnate. Gaiety and banqueting lasted until the sun was well up in the sky, at all the places to go in Nice. At Cannes, the Carlton Hotel was the scene of many dinner parties, the Anglo-American colony being well celebrated. At the casino, the unannounced entrance of Rudolph Valentino, who went over from Nice to attend a party as the guest of Monsieur Henri Letellier, created a flurry." End quote.
The cost for the weeks of dinner parties was incredible.
George Ullman writes how he was receiving all the bills forwarded to his office for payment in Los Angeles and becoming frantic. He also comments how he believed those dinners were mostly arranged by Manuel Ricci. George Ullman adds that he believes the entire trip was a scheme by Ricci to binge with Valentino in Europe. After the New Year's, they returned to Paris, despite some in the press reporting Rudy was going to Italy. In Paris, Rudy said goodbye to Mae, who left for New York aboard the SS Majestic on January 6th. Rudy then returned to his partying in Paris nightclubs with Manuel Ricci, which received a great deal of press coverage. And I read just one article published in the South Bend Tribune on January 15th, 1926. The title is "Society is Shocked." And I quote, "Rudolph Valentino was the guest of honor at a sumptuous banquet and party given by Henri Letellier Wednesday night, which ended at 8 a.m. The chic amazed the galaxy of notable guests, including numerous titled women and noted beauties of European society, invited to meet and vamp him, by ignoring everybody present except Rosica Dolly, who, with her twin, is playing here. Rudolph wandered aimlessly about during the early part of the evening, seemingly disinterested in all the charming and wealthy pillaresses of continental society who were presented to him, but grabbed off Rosica as soon as the Dolly sisters arrived after their performance. As the night wore on, the sheik went to Pearl White's house nearby, where breakfast was served and a few last Charlestons were danced." End quote. Ricci did nothing to curtail Rudolph's spending and no doubt encouraged it. In a shopping spree of absolute sky's the limit, Rudy indulged and bought antique armor, furniture, the best suits, hats, and coats money could buy, and more. It was during this time frame he charged on credit $1 million of entertainment, which was referred to as his, quote, restoration to bachelorhood. Such was his nightlife during those 10 days in Paris in January of 1926 that his clubbing with many women was reported lavishly in the French press, including every detail about his drinks and dances of choice, which were typically the Charleston and champagne beer cocktails. Now, Rudy left Paris and returned to London on January 18th to unite with his family to sail back to America. But on that very night of his arrival in London, he hardly tucked himself into bed early, we can say. He was seen out and about again in the company of his friend Henri Letellier, the richest man in France. When asked why he did not spend much time with his family while he was in Europe, Rudy replied he planned to spend a lot of time with them in California. The Valentino goodbye was well covered, and I cite just one article in the Leeds Mercury on January 20th, and I quote, "Goodbye to Valentino. A huge crowd at Waterloo this morning drew my attention to the departing boat train for Southampton. Its center proved to be Mr. Rudolph Valentino, whose 2-month stay in London has proved almost embarrassing to the film hero because of the too devoted attention of his admirers. Mr. Valentino is now going back to work in the studio, accompanied by his brother, a lawyer who wants to study film production methods in Hollywood. The next appearance of the popular star will be in The Son of the Sheik, which I believe is Miss M. Hall's sequel to her best-selling story, The Sheik. I have heard Mr. Valentino say he did not care very much for playing caveman parts, but the public wanted to see him in them, and being a wise man, he gives the public what it asks for." End quote. Rudy arrived in New York with the family, and they took the train west without delay, arriving in Los Angeles on February 4th. Now, many of the events which took place during Valentino's trip that winter have been reported in error. And to straighten out a few points with some facts. Rudy did visit Natasha's mother and stepfather in the Hudnut Chateau in Juan-le-Pin, while Mae Murray waited down the road in Nice, as I reported in Affairs Valentino. He did not see Natasha while in France, as has been reported. He did attend a party hosted by his friend Henri Letellier in the casino in Monte Carlo, but on New Year's Day. But he did not spend Christmas with his family in London, as this would have been physically impossible.
We have to mention the subject of Mae's son Koran, a baby born 9 months after her affair with Valentino.
Renato, as you know, I am going to present the following data as a contribution to the subject of Mae's mysterious son, Koran. And I say up front that this is not a proven fact, but things to consider regarding Koran's history. In 1928, it was revealed Mae had a son, a toddler then, living in Europe. He was rarely seen, and photographs of the child are nearly non-existent. He believed he was born on January 5th, 1926. That was the date given to him as his birth date. But he never had a birth certificate as proof or consequently a passport. I am not delving into the complex story of Mae's son Koran, but I can say this. After reading the extensive coverage we have just referenced, Mae Murray was not 9 months pregnant at that party at the Negrisco, and not heavily pregnant throughout that trip. It would have been called out. She did not give birth a couple of days after the party at the Negrisco and in Nice, and she did not give birth 24 hours before she boarded the SS Majestic on January 6th to travel home to New York. The clues which do exist, which we uncovered, contribute to a scenario which is not so far-fetched, all things considered. I know a few people who are actively researching this angle. But for our purposes in this episode, I share the following. According to Michael Anchorich's biography of Mae Murray, he says her brother William thought she, and I quote, got knocked up in Europe. There would obviously have been many suitors who could have been on the list of possible dads. But I have to ask, was she pregnant with Rudolph's baby? Surely because of the timing of his affair with Mae, he makes the short list. Some interesting things contribute to a bit of credibility as to that reality. Mae married Russian Prince David Mirvani the following June, 5 months after her return to Los Angeles. If she was pregnant at the time she married her Prince David Mirvani in June, she would have been about 5 months pregnant. In contemplating this supposition, I noticed the wedding pictures of Mae and her new husband, David Mirvani, with Rudy as the best man and Paula Negri as the maid of honor. Mae is wearing a loose-fitting wedding dress, and despite it being June in Los Angeles, she's wearing a fur jacket. Next to her, we see Rudy's squeeze of the moment, Paula Negri, wearing a dress with a tight waist, flattering her figure. Mae, not at all. Was she hiding a pregnancy? And within the following 3 months, in September, 9 months after her affair with Rudolph in December of 1925, we find Mae returning alone from France aboard the SS Tuscania. Did she return to France to give birth to a child? Perhaps Valentino's child? Considering also that Valentino had just died a few weeks before, and so tragically, Mae would have not wanted any scandal to be known which could have tarnished his legacy at a time when the world was mourning his death. She would have done everything she could to prevent a scandal, and indeed there is a great deal of evidence of her subterfuge in hiding her son Koran for a few years. One other point to consider. In 1927, Mae borrowed $22,000 from the Rudolph Valentino estate. Ullman agreed to loan her the money at interest, which she repaid. It is reported she borrowed this money to produce the Merry Widow Review, but one has to wonder, why at this time? Why from Rudolph Valentino's estate? Was this connected to her child? News of baby Koran, as I mentioned, was not made public until 1928, and David Mirvani would claim Koran was his son.
There is a great deal online about the rest of the story.
There is, Renato, but I found it intriguing when we found the U.S. Department of Labor, Immigration and Naturalization Service Form number 548 from the Manifest Registry for the Port of Quebec that on August 27, 1927, Mae and David Mirvani entered Canada aboard the SS Empress of Australia with a child. Mirvani has given the boy his surname, and they give his age as 1.5 years old. Despite Mae later describing Koran as being blonde and blue-eyed, the official recording of the information on this form noted he had brown eyes and fair hair. But questions remain and the timing remains interesting. One thing is certain, the child was not born on January 5, 1926, 24 hours before Mae left for New York. And I allege he was born the following September and in France. I contribute those insights for others' considerations because, honestly, Renato, the subject is a sizable rabbit hole, which I'm leaving for someone else.
We have to thank George Ullman for shedding truth on Rudy and Mae's European affair.
Yes, he was a first-hand, credible witness. The other day someone referred to Ullman's telling of the anecdotes about his life with Valentino as being authentic. Perfect word. Rudolph and Mae's passionate kissing and their embrace in his car in the parking lot of the American Legion Arena? Authentic.
So, what do you say to those people who doubt this affair between Mae and Rudy?
I say take into consideration that Rudolph Valentino was a 31-year-old Italian male who was known for being the most good-looking man on the face of the earth at the time. He had a mighty history of bedding women, from as far back as his teenage years in the brothels of Taranto, when he wrote about this in letters to his friend Bruno. And I say, take into consideration all of the first-hand witnesses and such documents as the letter from his wife, Natasha, included in the Balthasar Couet book, The True Rudolph Valentino, which she wrote resigning to how it did not matter to her whether her husband Rudy had one woman or 100. Valentino did not make an effort to hide his lust for women, who were in every case the world's most captivating and beautiful women. Mae Murray, in my opinion, provided a safe zone for his breakaway from the pains of his recent separation from Natasha. And as far as Mae's marriage to David Midirani in June, one has to wonder, looking at that lineup in the wedding photos, did they all know what was happening, or did none of them have a clue? It's probably fair to say Paula Negri pushed Mae's marriage to Midirani into reality, wanting Rudolph for herself. Midirani was thrilled with the opportunity to be married to the then wealthy and incredibly famous Mae Murray. And Rudolph, he was surely happy for Mae. But as far as Mae's possible pregnancy then, did they all know what was happening, or did none of them know? Did Mae manage to keep this a secret from everyone? I'm not sure what to believe as to the bottom line about Mae's baby. I think she was pregnant when she married Midirani because she's wearing the perfect wedding dress for a 5-month pregnant lady. And her return from France alone a few months later is compelling circumstantial evidence to me. For me, Renato, it was that wedding dress which stands as the true clue. What actress, known as the glamorous bombshell, would negate her shapely figure to wear a sack dress on her wedding day? The few photos that do exist of Koran reveal he was not blonde, but had dark hair and dark eyes. So whatever one's thoughts on this are, it cannot be denied Mae gave birth to a child in this time period in Europe and hid his very existence for 2 years. And she also hid all data about his birth so successfully even Koran never knew the true story. It's not hard to wonder why.
So much of this story has been reported incorrectly.
It has been, Renato, and as much as this time has been glossed over, erroneously reported on, and scantily covered, I'm happy we've added some facts to the story. The glorious French Riviera and the Hotel Negrisco hold their Valentino and Mae Murray's secrets. Of a time when life was carefree, a laugh was as easy as a fresh bottle of chilled champagne, and luxury was the drug of choice. Regarding our research on this story, we found somewhat of a dearth of information in the German archives about Valentino and Mae Murray's Christmas there, and this could have been a political move as to avoid any appearance of supporting Valentino. Most of the data we uncovered was cross-referenced in British, American, and French press. The French Riviera archives from Menton, Monte Carlo, and Nice included meticulous listings of guests at the various hotels and society column coverage of the parties and celebrities, and provided details of this lost story of Valentino's New Year's Eve dinner. Unfortunately, the Hotel Negrisco told us they have no historical archives. So in closing, I want to thank everyone who supports us and our podcasts. Thank you for listening. And find our books online with all our research and new Valentino history, which we are so anxious to share with everyone.
And for today, I say, as the usual, Fiat Justitia ruat celum. And for the good guys, arrivederci.